Frozy with Two Beards and a Board Game. Today we're going to learn how to play Blood Mansion. Recently received this from Kickstarter. It plays 2 to 6 players and takes between 15 and 30 minutes to play. Okay, when you open up your box, you're going to have a bunch of different cards. You may have some punch-out tokens. We did have the deluxe edition from Kickstarter, so our characters are made out of wood, little wood gears here. You'll have your action cards, guilt cards, weapon cards, murder cards, and your suspect cards. Alright, to get started, you're going to let everybody choose a character or randomly assign a character to everybody, either by drawing from a bag or just throwing them out to whoever you want. Each character has an ability on the bottom of it. Once that ability's been used, you flip this over in front of you to show that that ability's been used. So once everybody has a character, you're going to pick up your suspect deck, and your suspect deck is going to consist of a couple of things here. You've got a bunch of dead-end cards. Those are going to get shuffled into the main deck. And then you've got a bunch of character cards. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take the character cards out that each player is playing with. So let's say we're playing with 5 people. We're going to take these 5 characters out. We're going to take the remaining characters, we're going to set them aside. They're not going to be used in the game. You're going to take these character cards, you're going to shuffle them up. And then you or somebody else can randomly pick one out. That's going to be your murderer for the game. Now, nobody is going to know who this is. And then we've got a nice little sleeve for the innocent suspect cards. You want to set those guys aside like that. So next up in setup is to create the main deck. You're going to take your murderer card, make sure nobody has seen this, put it in with your dead end cards, and this is going to be a little counterintuitive to a lot of players, at least to our game group. You're going to take all these cards, except for your murder cards, you're going to set those aside. You're going to take your action cards, your guilt cards, and your weapon cards, and you're going to shuffle them all together, even though they all have different backings. I know that seems strange, but that's how it goes. Okay, once you got those all shuffled up, you're going to deal 5 cards to each player. So each player is going to have 5 cards. It may be a mix of actions, weapons, guilt, suspects. Each player is going to get 5 cards. And then you're going to randomly determine who goes first. First player is going to take the top murder card, flip it over, and that is the murder. So what this tells us is essentially just what the murder weapon is. That's important because to win the game you have to have the murder weapon in your hand to either escape or accuse the murderer. Okay, so during your turn you're going to have your 5 cards. A couple of different things that you can do. First, you don't have to, draw a card from the deck. You may also discard a card from your hand. It is important to note if you have the weapon card, so for the weapon, for this one is the sword. If you have the weapon card in your hand, you are not allowed to discard this card under any circumstances. So this card cannot go to the discard pile. So once you've chosen if you want to draw a card, you can play an action. There's a couple of different types of actions. There's ones that make the next player lose a turn. You can pick a player, take one card of your choice from that player. Pick a player, they must give you all their weapons cards. And then there's also an action card called Slam. It slams the door. It's essentially a counterspell or a nope or a cancel. If somebody were to play, if somebody were to play this, next player loses a turn, you could, they put that in the discard pile, and then you could say no, and you slam the door, and then the lose a turn action doesn't happen, so you still get to take your turn. You can also, on your turn, use your scheme. So as I said earlier, each of the players has an ability. This is Steal Guilt, lets you steal a guilt card from another player. There's a Steal Weapon. Once you've used it, you can only do it on your turn. With the exception of one of the characters lets you essentially use a slam the door ability. But once you use it, you're going to flip it over so that you know that it's been used. You obviously can't use that again. Okay, so how do you win this game? Well, there's two ways to win this game. If you're not the murderer, you're going to try to figure out who the murderer is, collect the weapon, get enough guilt cards to accuse the murderer. If you're right, then you'll win the game. If you are the murderer, you have to figure out you're the murderer, and then you have to collect the weapon and collect a couple of guilt cards to escape and win the game. So as a non-murderer player, your goal is to get through the deck until you find the suspect card. There will be only one suspect card that has... They're all at the bottom of the deck. There'll be only one suspect card that has the actual murderer's portrait on it. The rest of them will be these dead-end cards. So as you're playing the game, you're going to go through and try to figure out who the murderer is. Let's see if we can find him. Of course, it was the last one I looked at. Okay, so you're going to try to find out who the murderer is. So now, once you know who the murderer is, you don't need to keep this card in your hand. You just need to have seen the card. Which means, you know, during the course of the game, people will be able to steal cards from you. So this card will get shuffled back and forth a lot. But again, you don't need to have this card in your hand to accuse the murderer. You just need to have seen it at some point during the game. However, what you do have to have is this weapon card. Whatever is on your murder card, you need that weapon card. So in this case, it looks like it's a dagger or a sword. Let's see if we can find it here real quick. No, not the stiletto. Not the gun, it's a sword. So, to accuse the murderer, you need to have the sword in your hand. In this instance, the other murderer cards have different weapons on them. You need to have seen who the murderer is, and then you need to have at least, well, this is different depending on how many players you play, so make sure you look at your rule book, figure out how many points you need. But you need guilt points. So the guilt points are in the upper right hand corner. There's 5s, there's 15s, and there's 10s. So you need any combination of guilt cards that equal the number of points you're going for. If it's 2 to 4 players, it's 40 points. If it's 5 to 6 players, it's 30 points. Once you have your 30 points, let's say we have this here, right? We've got that. We've seen the murderer, and we've got the sword in our hand. We can then accuse the murderer and say, you're the murderer, I have the points, I have the weapon, and that's how you win the game. Now, one of the players will be the murderer themselves. They won't know it. They have to find the murderer card as well. That's how they figure out they're the ones that did the murder. They, however, win the game in a slightly different way. They do need to still get this weapon card, whatever is on the murder card. They need to get that weapon card. And then they need to, instead of getting guilt points, they need to get 2 guilt cards that match, here we go, that the transportation symbol matches on. So there's 2 trains, you could get 2 boats, there's chariots, I think, or not chariots, wagons, stuff like that. So for the murderer to win, again, you have to have seen the card to know that you're the murderer. You have to have the weapon card in your hand, and you have to have 2 guilt cards with matching symbols here. And then you say, I'm the murderer and I escape, and you show your cards, and you've won as the murderer. So again, the goal of the game is to find the murderer, find the weapon, get enough guilt cards so you can make an accusation, or if you are the murderer, get 2 guilt cards that match so that you can escape. Throughout the game, you're going to essentially just be picking up cards and playing them. A lot of them make people discard a lot of stuff. So, like in this instance, put all their suspect and false weapon cards in the discard pile. Well, if you were to play this on another player and they are not allowed to discard the actual weapon, so if they were to discard all their other weapon cards and still have one in their hand, well, then you would know that that is the actual weapon for the murderer. And so you would then want to go after that card and try to get that as quickly as possible so that you had it in your hand to make an accusation or escape. One of the interesting and kind of, counterintuitive things about this game is that you can always see what your opponent is holding in their hand. And you may not be able to see the specific cards, obviously, but you are going to be able to see whether they're holding a lot of actions or if they have a weapon or a suspect, or guilt cards in their hand because of the different colored backs. They've worked this into the game so that you can specifically target different types of cards. So I know that's going to seem a little strange to a lot of people playing the game. It was a little strange for us when we first played, but that's just the way it is. It lets you specifically target it. If you have a card that lets you take a card of your choice from your opponent, you can say, oh, he's got a suspect card. I'm going to take the suspect card. It's a dead end. Well, that doesn't help you much, but you get the idea. Just as a side note, there is a 5-card hand limit. If you end your turn with more than 5 cards, you need to discard down to 5. The game calls this dead weight. It's essentially just discard down to 5, like any other game, and then move on to the next player's turn. Well, that's it. That's how you play Murder at Blood Mansion. It's a pretty simple game to pick up. It's a fun game. It goes pretty quick. I think our games only last about 10. I think the second game maybe lasted maybe 20 minutes. So it's a nice, quick pick-up game. There's not a lot of setup to it. We appreciate you watching the videos. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. We do have a video review of this up as well. I'll go ahead and put that in the section below. Leave us a comment if you have any questions about the game or any comments like that. Have a good one.